Good morning, everyone. Oh, there we go. It's on. So for around 15 years, I lived on Long Island, New York, serving at two different churches there, and often my family would travel back home, which is Illinois, to visit family. And on one of those trips, we stopped about halfway in Columbus, Ohio, for gas and snacks, all the essentials, Dr. Pepper, things like that. So I stopped, I filled up the van with gas, pulled off to the side, and we all went inside, got what we wanted to get, and myself and my daughter came out to the van, and we got in, so we're waiting on my wife Vicky and my son, and not even 20 seconds, 30 seconds after I got in the van, the door threw open and somebody jammed something hard into my side. And so I was being robbed for the very first time. Never happened again. Never happened on Long Island, New York, which everyone thought it would. But it happened in Columbus, Ohio. And so all I could do was just sit there. And he said, where is it? And I assume he's looking for my wallet and any money that I may have had. Which actually I remembered a little bit ago that I had just locked our envelope of travel money in the glove box. So thankfully he didn't see that. But all I could do was just sit there as he reached around and was pulling, and I didn't help him. I just sat there, and about that time my son, who was 9 or 10, got into the van while this is going on, and I just said, Jake, get out, go back into the gas station. My daughter went to leave and get out, and he said, if you get out, I'll shoot him. And so Jake ran inside and told Vicky. He told Mom, and she started asking people for help. No one would help her. She tried to grab a wine bottle out of someone's hand. I guess she was going to use it on the guy. But the lady wouldn't give it up. So she just grabbed one off the shelf, took a drink, and ran outside. I was kidding. Just kidding. Don't tell her I said that. She ran outside, didn't know what to do, and she ran behind the guy and just smacked him on his back. And he had my wallet at that point, and he just ran. He took off running, and all I could do was just sit there with my hands up, and I was frozen. I was stunned, in shock, and I just watched him as he ran, pants falling down. He was one of those guys that wore his pants kind of low, but you know what? It was in that moment that I just felt the opposition of the world, the opposition of Satan, just weighing heavy. We were headed back home to visit family because we were switching churches and questioning whether we wanted to continue in ministry on Long Island, 1,000 miles from home, and we were just, and you know that this just added to that questioning. And so we were feeling that opposition, and I remembered John chapter 15, verses 18 through 25, and it says this: if the world hates you, this is Jesus talking, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. Remember what I told you. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. If they obeyed my teaching, they will obey yours also. They will treat you this way because of my name, for they do not know the one who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not be guilty of sin. But now they have no excuse for their sin. Whoever hates me hates my Father as well. If I had not done among them the works no one else did, they would not be guilty of sin. As it is, they have seen, and yet they have hated both me and my Father. But this is to fulfill what is written in their law. They hated me without reason. So Jesus is preparing us to expect opposition. The world sees us as a traitor. The message of the world is me, selfish, self-centered, and maybe, like me, you've asked yourself, what am I supposed to do? If the world hates the message of Christianity, why bother trying to share it? No one will listen to me. And so how do we deal with that? What do we do? How do we respond? And I believe it lies in John chapter 15, verse 17, the verse right before the passage I just read, and it says this: "This is my command, love each other." The message of Jesus is love one another, and we should be known for his love. And so in order to do that, I believe we need to see what Jesus sees, know what Jesus knows, and feel what Jesus feels. He saw crowds of hurting people. He saw people that needed a Savior, someone to lead them out of the dark, out of spiritual darkness. He saw crowds that were burdened by the religious system of the day. And today people are burdened by the world and what the world throws at them. And Jesus saw that people desperately needed a new message. They needed a teacher. Not a teacher like they were used to, but one that spoke with power and authority. A teacher that spoke words of life. And we find in Luke chapter 6 and Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7 the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount was radical for the day. No teacher in his right mind would suggest that the poor are actually the ones that would be blessed, that they would be what the kingdom of heaven was all about. No teacher would suggest that those who mourn are the ones who are blessed, and no respected rabbi would allow sinful people to touch him. And why would Jesus teach that? Because Jesus saw people who needed a different kind of teacher. A teacher who would meet them on the side of a mountain, a teacher who met them exactly where they were in life. Every rabbi had his own interpretation or understanding of Old Testament law, and he would seek to promote those beliefs among his followers so they would embrace it and say, "I want to follow this rabbi." And back then, the rabbi's interpretation was often called his yoke. And so when you followed a rabbi, you were placing yourself under that person's yoke. And when you think of the word yoke, think of that person's philosophy and their teachings. And so we see in Matthew 11, verses 28 through 30, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And so this rabbi is saying, I'm different than all the others. Because the others, they have a yoke that has an endless list of rules, but not Jesus. Now, a rabbi wants to perpetuate his yoke, his teachings, and so he would look for followers, disciples, who after he is gone would carry on his teachings. Followers that would embrace his message. And so there's a saying that is found in the oral commentary of the Old Testament law. And it says this: "May you be covered in the dust of your rabbi." In other words, may you be so committed to becoming like your rabbi that you follow him so closely and with such passion and devotion that as the rabbi walks, you are so close behind that you are covered in his dust. And so that's our first step in responding to the opposition of the world. It's to be covered in the dust of Jesus, to be following him so closely that we see what he sees, and that is a world that is lost without him. When Jesus looked upon those crowds, he saw lost people, not only in need of a teacher, but Jesus knew people needed a different kind of leader. More importantly, people in need of a king like no other. Our world is full of leaders, some good, some bad, but none like Jesus. No one would ever lead the way Jesus does. And throughout his ministry, no king would talk about his kingdom like Jesus did. Look at Jesus' kingdom. He accepted outsiders. No king would do that. He allowed sinful people to touch him. No king would do that, but Jesus did. When kings talk, they speak of their strength. They call attention to their power. But Jesus is no ordinary king. We find in Luke 14, Jesus talking about throwing a party, and he said, "You should invite the people that no one else would invite." And since we're followers of Jesus, we try to imitate him. We want to be followers that care for widows and orphans. We want to be followers that help the unemployed, the underemployed. We want to be followers that minister to the homeless. We want to be followers that look out for the overlooked. When I lived on Long Island, I would often serve with an organization called Lighthouse Mission. And the mission existed to feed hungry and help the homeless by sharing God's love in practical ways. And Lighthouse Mission would share God's love with a Saturday morning kids club, and the goal of the club was to reach kids with the love of Jesus. They would bus in kids from homeless shelters, kids living in extreme poverty, kids who the only meal they would get that day was at the Lighthouse Mission. And so one Saturday I was helping and working with some older kids, and I was walking from kid to kid to see how they were doing on their craft. And I sat down at the end of the table in an empty chair, and I started talking to the kids, and I don't remember what I said. Probably tried to crack a stupid joke or something. But I said something to a girl across the table from me, and she looked at me and said, "You don't know me." So I introduced myself and said whatever I said, and she looked at me and said it again. "You don't know me." It was obvious she had no interest in sharing even the smallest detail about her life. Now, I don't know exactly what was going on in her life, but I knew it wasn't easy, but I knew she was exactly where she needed to be. And she was right. I didn't know her. But Jesus did, and he still does. He knows everything about that girl, and he knows exactly what she's going through and exactly what she needs. And so Luke 14, verses 12 through 14, Jesus says this: when you give a luncheon or a dinner, don't invite your friends, your brothers, or your sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. And so that's why we do things here at RCC, like Thanksgiving, Living, Loving. We collect boxes for Operation Christmas Child. We offer a food pantry to our community. We go on mission trips. We have leaders who work hard to help us stay focused on these things. And we have a mission statement that says we will be a loving and authentic, Christ-centered community, bringing hope, freedom, and purpose to our local and global community. And so what does Jesus want us to know? That people are lost and hurting without him. They are burdened by a world that pushes selfish motives, and they are often forgotten. And finally, we learn what Jesus felt. He feels the hurt. He feels the desperation, the anxiety, the grief, and he feels love. The love of God, a love that led him to the cross, a love that led him to death and separation from his Father, a love that rose him from the dead and brought rescue, salvation, and hope to all people. It was Max Lucado who said, "Let him into the muck and mire of your world. Let him in, because only if we let him in with his humanity can he pull us out." And he's right. Jesus came to show us what would happen if a person walked so in tune with him and followed his example and actually obeyed him. When we do that, it becomes so obvious that there's something different about us. Acts 4:13 tells us this: when they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished, and they took note that these men had been with Jesus. In other words, they looked like their rabbi. They had followed Jesus so closely, they were covered in his dust. And because they depended on the Holy Spirit and not on themselves, they were able to accomplish some amazing things. They had a front row seat. They had a front row seat when it came to seeing incredible miracles of Jesus, turning water into wine at a wedding, healing a demon-possessed man, raising people from the dead. What about you? What do people say when they look at you? Is it obvious there's something different about you? Is it obvious you follow Jesus? Is it obvious that you see what Jesus sees, that you know what Jesus knows, that you feel what Jesus feels? There's a miracle that's recorded for us in every single gospel, and we call it the feeding of the 5,000, because it tells us that he fed 5,000 men, but there were more than men there. The crowd was probably over 15,000 people, and they all came because they wanted to be healed by Jesus. They wanted to hear him teach, and they wanted to catch a glimpse of him. But do you remember what the setting was when that happened? Jesus had drawn away from the crowd so that he could be alone with his disciples. Why? Because his friend and his cousin, John the Baptist, had just been beheaded. Jesus wanted some alone time with his closest friends and disciples, rather than masses who wanted to get close to him. But as was the case with someone that popular at that time, it just didn't last for long. And the small group became a large group, and they came in droves by the thousands, a multitude of misery and sickness, bringing nothing but requests. And we are told that when Jesus sees the crowds, he has compassion on them. And there's something special about that word, compassion. It's a feeling deep in the gut that leads to action. But here's the thing, the disciples, they don't share Jesus' compassion. They don't feel it deep in their guts. It's been a long day. They've missed lunch and dinner, and these thousands of people are just hanging on. There are long lines. Everyone's listening to Jesus, and we find in Matthew 14:15, as evening approached, the disciples came to Jesus and said, "This is a remote place. It's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Now, the disciples typically preface their comments with a respectful term, like Lord, Lord, but not this time. In fact, if you were to understand it in the original language, they issue a command to Jesus. Send these people away. Let them go get food on their own. They've stayed longer than they should have. It's not our responsibility to do anything for them. They should have known to pack a lunch. But Jesus is not bothered or frustrated by their disrespect or their lack of compassion. He simply gives them an assignment. In verse 16, Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." And so the disciples quickly do some checking. They hadn't intended to stay that long, so they didn't pack a lunch. This teacher had captured their attention, and their empty stomachs took a back seat to the way their hearts felt as he spoke and as he healed. And instead of leaving when they should have, they didn't want to miss out on anything Jesus said, so they chose to stay and miss lunch. And so what happens? We see in verse 17 that the disciples come back from tallying up their resources, and they say to Jesus, "We only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. That's it. We did an inventory. We did what you said. Look what we got. We got one boy who's got some food. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish." And they're just mesmerized by what they have, because that's all they've got. And they think, what can we do? This won't even feed the front row. And they sense the fact that it's pretty measly, because they even add the word only. We only have. In fact, Philip even throws in one more comment in one of the other Gospels. He's the guy that liked to calculate. He was an accountant. And he says, hey, it would take 8 months' wages to feed one bite to every person here. There's always that one guy in the group, right? Figuring things out. That was Philip. 8 months' wages to give everybody one bite. But I believe they missed an opportunity, the disciples. Remember when Jesus said, "You give them something to eat"? I think the answer to the problem's in that statement. I believe he was saying, "Give them me." And you can almost sense what Jesus is thinking. He was thinking, come on, guys. The answer is right in front of you. Just say it. Stop counting loaves of bread and fish and just give them me. If you've got Jesus, it really doesn't matter what the number is you count to. If you're really following Jesus, you won't ask those questions. You will feel what Jesus feels because you already have what you need, Jesus. Our challenge this morning, as we think about how the world stands in opposition to us and hates the message Jesus gave us to love one another, is to see what Jesus sees, know what Jesus knows, and feel what Jesus feels, and ultimately know you have what you need, Jesus. Maybe you've seen the movie Hacksaw Ridge. The movie tells the story of Desmond Doss, who refuses to carry a rifle into battle, and he refuses to take life, but instead save life. When war broke out and all of his peers and friends and buddies were enlisting to serve his country, he felt a call to serve as well. He knew he couldn't serve in combat given his convictions, so he enlisted with the goal to become a medic. He was persecuted for his beliefs during basic training. He was labeled a coward. He was beaten by fellow soldiers who tried to get him to give up and quit. He was berated and belittled by his commanding officer, who also wanted him out. So the commanding officer devised a plan to have him court-martialed for not following every instruction, which included the rifle training portion. Desmond wouldn't compromise or back down from his calling. He knew that in war, soldiers were going to take lives. He was going to save them. Nothing could deter him. He never fought fire with fire. He turned the other cheek when he was unjustly treated, and he kept hold of his faith. And so Desmond was granted the opportunity to go into battle and to never have to carry a weapon. And so Desmond, with his Bible tucked into his uniform near his heart, stayed faithful to God and faithful to his calling to support his fellow soldiers as a medic while also maintaining his conviction. And so in order to advance against the Japanese in World War II, U.S. troops were going to have to take Hacksaw Ridge. It's not going to be pretty. It was not going to be easy. Many would lose their lives. However, many would have them saved by Desmond Doss. So things were not going well. Many had been killed and injured by the Japanese, and the commanding officer gave the order for the U.S. troops to retreat, and they all left, all except one. Desmond Doss began praying, asking God what he should do. It was then that he heard a cry for help. It was a cry that anchored Desmond to God's mission for him once again, and Desmond knew what he had to do. He spent the night saving wounded men. He carried them to the side of that ridge, lowered them to safety, praying each time, Lord, help me get one more. So over the course of 12 hours, he rescued 75 American and Japanese soldiers. Maybe you say the same prayer. God, what do you want me to do? I know I've said it lots of times, and maybe in the back of your mind you're thinking, the world doesn't want to hear from me. When our prayer should be, help me get one more. When we see what Jesus sees, know what Jesus knows, and feel what Jesus feels, it won't matter that the world hates us. It won't matter that we get called names. It won't matter that the world tries to discredit us. It won't matter that we feel awkward and nervous about inviting a friend to church or praying in public. All that will matter is that we have Jesus. Jesus, God's Son, came to earth because of a war for our souls, a war for our eternal destiny, and he gave his life so that you and I could be rescued from the clutches of sin and the condemnation that came with it. He heard the cries of help, the desperate cries of those wounded by bad choices, addictive behaviors, and unholy flaws. He knew he couldn't get out alive without help. He knew he couldn't make it to safety, so he knew we couldn't make it to safety, so he came to rescue us. His sacrifice, his death on the cross, paid the price for all who would believe in him and receive his forgiveness. And so let me ask you a question. Who's your one more? Who do you know right now who feels like the odds are stacked against them? They're surrounded on all sides. They're staring at a mountain. They feel like there's no chance they can get through. The fires of life are raging all around them. They need a breakthrough. You could be that breakthrough. Who is your one more? So we're waiting on the police to arrive. I remember I had my hands up. I was just kind of frozen. Well, by this point, we've moved the van off to the side, and we're all just sitting in the van, kind of shaking and looking over our shoulder every time somebody walked by, feeling kind of scared. And a gas station employee walks up to me. He said, "Hey, can I pray for you?" I tell you, I didn't expect that in that moment. But he knew what we had just been through. He could see it. He could feel it. And that night, we were his one more. Let's pray. God, help me to see what Jesus sees. Help me to know what Jesus knows. And help me to feel what Jesus feels. God, show me my one more.